Somewhere in the middle of the Detroit River, a steel cable, the thickness of a man's torso, holds the weight of a quarter of all trade between the United States and Canada. Every hour, hundreds of trucks cross that span. The Ambassador Bridge is not merely a landmark, it is an artery. And for nearly a century, it has been the most consequential border crossing on Earth. By the time the 20th century arrived, the Detroit River had become a choke point unlike any other in North America. Railroads on both sides of the border needed to move freight between Chicago and the Atlantic seaboard, but the river stood in the way. Ferries carried freight cars across, slowly, awkwardly, at the mercy of weather and ice. At peak moments, 700 to 1,000 rail cars waited their turn. Grain rotted in Chicago warehouses. Consumer goods sat in eastern depots. Prices rose across the continent. Farmers and merchants demanded a solution. Engineers attempted a tunnel in 1871. Ventilation failed. The project died. A bridge proposal came next. The Army Corps of Engineers studied it. Shipping interests objected. Congress deliberated. Nothing moved. The railroad tunnel finally opened in 1910, but it served only select lines. The need for a bridge did not go away. After the First World War, the ambition resurfaced. Michigan automakers saw opportunity. They saw a bridge that could link the industrial Midwest to central Canada. They formed a company. Then disaster struck early. A Toronto financier hired to raise capital, embezzled the funds, and fled. He was later convicted of murdering a drugstore clerk and died by suicide in prison. The project seemed cursed. Then came Joseph A. Boer, a New York businessman who specialized in rescuing mismanaged ventures. Boer raised the essential $12 million. Henry Ford backed the effort. "The only way things can be done today," Ford said, "is by private business." That phrase would define the bridge for the next 100 years. Construction began in 1927. The general contractor was McClintock Marshall Company of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What they built was staggering. The main suspended span stretched 1,850 feet across the Detroit River, the longest in the world at the time of its completion in 1929. The total bridge reached 7,500 feet. The roadway climbed 152 feet above the water. 21,000 short tons of steel went into the structure. Only the central span relied on suspension cables. The approaches used cantilever truss construction. The George Washington Bridge would surpass its record 2 years later. But for that brief moment, no bridge on Earth had reached further. The bridge opened carrying travelers and commerce. It also carried tragedy. In April 1930, a Canadian immigration inspector jumped from the span. He would not be the last. In 2000, a scaffolding collapse sent workers into the river. One man died. The engineer responsible for that structure would later be connected to the Radiohead stage collapse in Toronto in 2012. The bridge had its scars. In 22, protesters from the Freedom Convoy blockaded the crossing for days, halting billions of dollars in cross-border trade. In 25, confused drivers accidentally found themselves crossing into Canada and were detained by federal authorities. The bridge's geography made it an accidental border for the unwary. For decades, the man at the center of the bridge's story was Manuel Moron, a Grosse Pointe billionaire who began buying shares when the bridge was listed on the New York Stock Exchange in 1979. He eventually took it private. He delayed highway connections to push traffic past his duty-free fuel pumps. He sued governments. He went to jail briefly for defying court orders. He fought the construction of the competing Gordie Howe International Bridge for years. He asked $3 billion when Canada offered $2 billion. He won some battles and lost others. He died in 20, leaving a legacy as complicated as the structure he owned. The Gordie Howe Bridge now rises downstream, publicly owned, built to finally offer an alternative. The Ambassador Bridge today carries more than 10,000 commercial vehicles on a typical weekday. In 24, 2.3 million trucks crossed it. The trade it moves, automotive parts, consumer goods, manufactured products, holds up communities on both sides of the river. A 2004 study found 150,000 jobs and $13 billion in annual production tied directly to this crossing. One bridge, one river, one point of passage carrying the weight of two nations' economies across its aging steel. If you found this history worth knowing, subscribe for more stories of human ambition in steel, stone, and concrete.